this week's episode of Grooves of Influence. My name's Xavier, your host, and I am excited to welcome guest artist Jimmy James onto the podcast this week. Jimmy, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit?
Yeah, I don't know much what to say, I guess. My name is Jimmy James. I play with the Parlor Greens and the True Loves.
Yeah, how did you get into music? Kind of what's your story?
Um, I remember I would say like 4 or 5. I would mess around on my late sister's drum set. She had a drum set. Actually, this used to be her room a long time ago. She since passed on, but I used to play on her drums. But she also had a little acoustic guitar a bit, and I used to kind of mess with that a little bit. But that was about it for a minute. But I wouldn't get serious into it guitar until I was like around 12.
I see. Very cool. And so every episode, I kind of start with the same question, and I'm curious for you, what is the most influential album?
For me, I would say Jimi Hendrix smash hits. But I mean, there's so many. But
If
as
you
far
had to
as
pick one, right?
you're right, it's a very hard one because I know what started me off on guitar, but I know also, I'll say this: the thing that started me off on guitar is when I heard "My Girl" and stuff. But smash hits was a tape my sister had, and that really like opened the doors for a lot of things.
What exactly did it open for you? Like what did you see from that album that
When I heard Jimi Hendrix for the first time, my sister was like a big heavy metal fan, progressive rock fan. And so at the time, I thought he was current. I thought he was like metal and stuff like that. And I heard Purple Haze for the first time, and it nearly scared the crap out of me because I didn't know where it was coming from. I never heard anything like that, especially at the very end of the song where he's really just making the guitar like grind away. And I was like, whoa, that is scary. And I heard Foxy Lady, of course. And at that time, I was like, I used to keep thinking, I was like, oh, he's current. Maybe when I get older, I'll see him in person. But of course, I was sadly mistaken that I was born 11 years after his passing. And I didn't think at that time he was from the 60s because I heard music from the 60s and I just didn't think he was from that time period. But I would soon find out, like in my teenage years and stuff.
Yeah, you hit on something I noticed throughout the album. Like it has almost a coloration to it, like sound wise, that I feel like is unusual for that time period. And then you go into this Jimmy album and you're like, it's dark, like it's shadowy, like it's I don't
Well,
know.
the Smash Hits is a compilation of some of the stuff from Are You Experienced and some of the stuff from his third album, Electric Ladyland. And so that was the album that I heard first before I started hearing like Are You Experienced, X as Bold as Love, Electric Ladyland. And you have to think this is a man coming from 1967 and was only around for 3.5 years since he came into London around 1966 and would pass away there in like 1970. And so he was only 27. So it was like, and still yet 50 plus years later after his passing, he still has had records coming out since then. And he's been having new music since his passing up until present day. For only 3.5 years, he did a lot in such a short amount of time. And so, and plus, I mean, he's from Seattle. He's from here, and he's from my neck of the woods, which is amazing to hear. And as I got older, I found out a lot of things. I found out that my mother's cousin, my late mother's cousin, who's still living, of course, she went to Garfield with him, went to Garfield with Jimi Hendrix, and her husband went to Garfield. She met her husband at Garfield, so they all three shared the same. They all shared the same class with him, and Hendrix would actually play in her husband's band called the Rocking Kings. And if you Google it, and you look up Jimi Hendrix Rocking Kings, there's a picture of them at Washington Hall playing, and you'll see Hendrix as a teenager playing a little white Supro guitar, and there's two horns on the drums, and there's a back of a guy's head playing piano. That's my mother's cousin's late husband playing in that band. They also played in a group called the Velvetones, and she remembers a lot of details because she would tell me stuff like she would feed him her apple or a sandwich, sometimes, and and she would accompany her steady, which later became her husband, at many times, like to the rehearsals and stuff. So she remembers a lot of stuff about who he was and what he was and stuff. And I talked to him, and he had a lot to say too. His only regret was he never got to see him live when he became big. And when he passed away, that really hurt him deeply. And he talked about that because, I mean, him and Hendrix are only 3 days apart because Jimi Hendrix is November 27, 1942, and he's November 24th, 1942. And here's another real good fact. Bruce Lee Bruce Lee and Jimi Hendrix, they both are the same birthday set. Bruce Lee is 2 years older than him. So Bruce Lee was born in 1940, where Hendrix was born in 42. So, and Bruce Lee also lived in Seattle, and he's buried over there near Capitol Hill, where Hendrix is buried up in Renton Highlands at the Greenwood Cemetery.
Interesting. I didn't know that. I'm
Hmm.
curious, did you when you hear these stories, did they know that Hendrix was gonna be something special? Like did they could they tell early on?
Hmm. Yeah, I talked to Robert Greene. Again, he's since passed on, um, but I talked to him. He told me he knew that he was going to be something because he slept, dreamed, ate the guitar all the time. He was always practicing. They said a lot of times they would go to like play like baseball or something like that. Hendrix didn't have a case, so he would just drag the guitar to the dugout, and he'd be sitting over in the corner playing. Sometimes that was all he ever did, and just constantly, And I asked him, I said, "Did you guys ever record stuff?" He's like, "We did. It wasn't that good, at the time. We were just teenagers." Hendrix wasn't had to play bass lines on the guitar because they didn't have a bassist, and they would play like sock hops and stuff, and they played the top 40 R&B cuts of the day. And they played like in Tacoma, at a place called the Spanish Castle, which Jimi Hendrix would later have a tune off the Axis Bold Love called Spanish Castle Magic. And I asked Robert Greene about that. I said, what's that story entail? What's that about? He's like, well, we used to play up there, and Hendrix liked to, daydream a lot. And he talked about, it takes a half a day to get there. This is because they were driving a vehicle that kept breaking down. And they made enough money to get burgers and fries and stuff like that. And that's when gas was like, what, 5 or 10 cents a gallon in them days or something like that. That's hard to imagine now, but they made enough money and they would get up there and they would play sock hops and dances and stuff like that. And just whatever got the kids dancing, they would play the top 40 R&B hits of the day. So he had a lot to say, and his widow, like I said, that's my mother's cousin. She had a lot to say about it too, about what it was in those days. So it's a lot. Like they had a lot of insight, stuff you can't really find in books, but to hear it from firsthand from the people who were there versus somebody who hears things and stuff like that, they knew that he was very hungry for the guitar, and it showed. And then, of course, he got in trouble, stuff like that, and ended up going to the military and did his stint there and did his stint as Sideman, and the rest is history.
Yeah, it's interesting. He was playing those R&B hits at those parties from a young age, like early in his development as an artist. And like I could hear those elements in some of his songs on this album, particularly. Like I think it's so easy to get lost in the blues and the rock influences, but there's some R&B stuff that Jimmy does. Um,
Well, yeah,
that's
because that's the
interesting.
stuff. That's the stuff. Like that was like in those days. It's like and again, you hear the stories from those people who are there, And it's like Hendrix learned the blues. He learned the blues, which is the thing most cats should know, at least start with the basis of that as a building block. And once you have that, it's like building a house. You build your foundation and then you go from there and you build up. And that's the blues. The blues is the foundation. And and that's where he came from, listening to his father's 45s and stuff like that, as they had in those days. And I say the same with myself. It was just like I just listened to my mother's records, playing wise, and it wasn't that she had to like put it towards me. It was just something I related to. I loved listening to Chuck Berry. I loved listening to Bobby Blue Bland, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf. And I was a young kid listening to this stuff. And so I related to it. So understanding Hendrix, that's where he was coming from too. He's coming from blues, but he was there in the thick of it when it was the thing. Everybody was playing that then. And it wouldn't come to my era, and I'm talking about like in the 90s, everything was more rock stuff and all that. And I was more just like, I relate more to, the Chuck Berrys, and I relate more to that stuff, or hearing Curtis Mayfield impressions. And then, of course, I got into James Brown and stuff like that. But I was like in my teens listening to that stuff, which was odd for, really odd for my age bracket to be listening to that, because everyone's like, man, you should be listening to stuff on, 112 or this or that or whatever it was. And I was just not into that sort of stuff. I dug some of it. There was some of it I dug. I did. But mostly my heart was in the blues. My heart was in early rock and roll, at that time. But mostly blues more so than anything.
Yeah, I definitely hear that in your music, of course. I mean, it seems like it's definitely leans that direction, just
Uh-huh.
grooving, man. You definitely got the groove. When you're talking about you relate to it, what do you mean by that exactly? Like you said, you relate to the blues.
Well, it's just like blues is a feeling, it's a feeling more than it to instead of like, okay, you got your 145, but blues is a feeling. We all go through the blues. Everybody goes through the blues. You know what I mean? It's like Albert King said it best. When a baby is trying to get a bottle and it's crying for that bottle, the baby has the blues. Or you work at a job that you hate and you're just like, you're not making enough money. Okay, well, that's the blues. Something happened in your life, a lost thing, a lost love, a lost one, or anything. You're going through the blues. Everybody goes through the blues, and some, you know, faction of life. We all do, either we go in, when you're down or you're going through a lot, turmoil and stuff like that. That's what it is, and so people sing about it, and it comes out in that way, the same way with soul music. It's the same, soul music, it's like comes from gospel. So it's like gospel's like salvation. So you can hear that. That's how I look at it.
So, in your own projects you've been a part of, do you see specific aspects of Jimmy that you've pulled that you could like actually like point to, or do you think there's like unconscious ways he's influenced your sound?
I would say it's a little bit of everything, you know. But the thing I loved about Jimi Hendrix, to me, and it's a man I wish I could have met in person. There would be a lot of things, questions I would ask, and a lot of things I would tell him. But the thing that he represented to me was freedom, and it showed. And like listening to his interviews, the way he dressed, the way he played of his time period was he represented freedom. You couldn't pigeonhole. People still can't pigeonhole him into a box, and that's what I loved about him. Like he did a song called "If Six Was Nine," and he's like, "I got my own world to live through. I ain't gonna copy you." And if he dressed how he wanted to dress, he just represented who he was, and so I loved his musical approach to freedom, like freak out and just go ham, which I love that about him, and I always have. And it was just something he interested me, and it was something I could relate to, because and being a kid, when you go out walking around, everybody's walking around with Nikes and shoes like that, and you're walking around like I'm dressed in like thrift store like bell bottoms and all that stuff, you know. So uh it just he represented just freedom. That's what he represents, in my opinion, and just the musical sincerity of it all, you know. And that's yeah, I mean, words can't really never explain it. Like I still can't even get the words out of what he means to me, but that's the best I could put it, I guess.
Yeah. And when you make your own music, how do you try to bring that sincerity? I mean, I'm imagining that you do.
Just I'm just being myself. I mean, there's no other way to be it. It's there's a great quote by the poet Oscar Wilde, who said, "You can only be yourself because everyone else is taken." And then the same thing goes as another quote I love to follow. The biggest quote I ever followed was by one of my favorite bassists of all time, the late great Mr. James Lee Jamerson, the bassist on all the great Motown classics from My Girl to What's Going On, Ain't No Mountain High Enough. I mean, the list goes on. And I was watching a Motown documentary called Standing in the Shadows of Motown, and he told his son, you know what? If you don't feel it, don't play it. So it's just like, I'm not going to play anything I don't feel. And that's just what it is. And I just, you know, and I'm not saying that in a negative light or negative way or anything like that. I just think it's just be yourself and play what's in you and play what's in your heart. I mean, there's no other way to do it. Nobody knows you but you, and your experience is different than the next person because nobody's a monolith. You're all everybody's different, has a different experience than the next person. So everybody, you can get three guitarists in the same room and they're playing a blues and say, I don't know, A, and it's all going to sound different because their experience is different. Somebody else is from a different town, or the upbringing was different, or the environment, and all that. And so that determines a lot of stuff. So you can only be yourself. You can't feel what somebody else is feeling because you're not that person. You're you.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I mean, you want to try to be authentic to your own sound. Um, I feel like, I mean, I would think it's sometimes hard to realize that. Did you kind of know that from an early age getting into music, or is it something you've kind of learned and kind of realized more and more you play?
I just never thought about it. I just was just being, you know, just naturally being me. You know, I never thought about it. I never, you know, I don't when coming to music, I don't really think about what I'm going to do or how I'm going to do it. It's just a thing that, you know, I touch a string and then all of a sudden I hear something. I don't, you know, pre-plan it. It's not like I wouldn't say like, and not in a bad way. I'm just saying like it's like I don't have a recipe. Like, okay, I got a measuring cup of flour and I got a measuring cup of this and a measuring cup of that. It's more just like, okay, you know what? I'm getting here. All right, I'm gonna throw a little bit in here, a little bit in there, taste it. I might need a little more of this, a little more of that. And you're just improvising on the spot. I don't even think about it. It's just because when you start thinking about it, it's not even music, you know, it's just like now it's becomes a science project. And I rather honestly just like, you know what? I'm just gonna go whatever the flow is and whatever is in the air right now, and whatever you know things are happening around me. I just play that. I play what I hear. I play what I could hear something down the street, or I could hear like I don't know, like I could be walking down the street and there's a rock in my shoe and it's making a certain sound, and I play that. Or the trees are swaying, and I might play to that rhythm. I don't, you know, that's how I look at it. It sounds crazy, but at the end of the day, it's just like I don't even think about it. I just don't know what's gonna happen the minute I touch a guitar. It just happens.
Yeah. So in your learning of the guitar, are you more just kind of learned a lot by ear then?
Yeah, I just listen to records. You know, I would listen to records and I would watch other people play and stuff like that. Um, the biggest teachers of all were my sisters and my mother. And again, all three of them are gone now. And I would just sit. My oldest sister was like the pop classical she listened to a lot of that, and she would like to read books a lot too. And so I would take up from her. She'd listen to Henry Mancini or Bach or somebody. And then she'd turn around, she's listening to Lionel Richie or Cyndi Lauper or George Michael. And then my middle sister, again, she's the heavy metal, the metalhead of the family. She liked progressive rock. Rush was her favorite group of all time. She liked Yes. She liked Van Halen, Metallica, Led Zeppelin, Jimi Hendrix. The list could go on. Uh, my mother, everybody took their cue from her because my mother was eclectic. I mean, my mother could go from listen to Motown and then turn around and she's listening to the Carpenters. Then she's listening to, uh, people like Patsy Cline or Loretta Lynn. So she liked country and western. So she was listening to that. Then she turned around and, oh, okay, well, I like Dave Matthews. So she's listening to that. She liked, true story. I remember when the Outcast album came out, Speaker Box Love Below. I was supposed to go get that. My mother actually bought that record before I did. Because she liked the song Hey Ya, she liked the song I Like the Way You Move, and then she liked Tupac's California Love, you know what I mean? So, and then she would turn around. If she liked what we were listening to, she would listen to that. She liked one of my sister's favorite songs, I Love Rock and Roll by Joan Jett or Judas Priest. Anything with a good beat or something like that. And then she loved the blues. She loved this. And so my mother was very eclectic in what she liked to listen to. If it had a good beat and it had a great melody and it had a great story, she would listen to it, and she liked it and didn't and nobody could really pigeonhole her because they tried. Some people tried to put her in a box and she's just like, no, good music is good music. If you like it, you like it, who cares, and we all took our cue from her of being eclectic in musical taste. And so having that connection of music around all three of them, they by far were my biggest influence. More so, that's where I could sit here, I could listen to a tune. I'm like, oh, I could hear that. I'm like, within the first few seconds, I'm like, oh, they're playing that, and it's like, how did you know they're playing that? Like last night I was playing a show and I heard the band playing. I was like, are they playing Rock the Casbah by Clash? And then somebody else would turn around and it was just like, uh, Tim was playing this tune by Anita Baker. He's like, you ever heard this? I said, yeah, my mother used to play it. My mother had it on an album. It's called Caught Up in the Rapture of Love. I heard that when I was a kid. Or a good friend of mine from New York, same thing. We turn on the radio. He's like, with the first few seconds, yeah, how you know that song? I'm like, I was around it all the time. I was around a lot of music all the time. So it's just like I could hear something, and sometimes certain things bring back like again, Tim played that Anita Baker tune, and it brought back flashbacks. Like I hadn't heard it in years, like decades. And all of a sudden, the words came back, the melody, the ad libs she did, all came back to me, and I could hear my mother having it on the record player. She just got off work. She's in the kitchen. She's doing something, and that record's playing. And I remember those moments, and they have really good moments for me, so I can hear it. So I'm always around that stuff.
That's awesome. That's what makes music special, man. The
Mm-hmm.
memories and stuff that can be associated with it, and the emotion that you try to capture with the music.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it's pretty cool. No, that makes sense though. Your that eclectic background, they'll definitely influence you in a lot of different ways. Was your
Mm-hmm.
mom a musician? Did she play?
My mother was a singer in a group called the Champels back in the mid to late '60s. My oldest sister was a pianist. Her name was Regina. She played piano and flute, and she was classically trained, so she knew how to play like classical stuff. And then my middle sister was a drummer, and then my grandmother, we wouldn't find out about until after her passing that she was a competition jitterbugger, and she were in first in state in her choir in Texas. And so I only heard my grandmother sing once, and that was on a visit down to Texas. And that was the only time I heard my grandmother sing, and I heard my older sister play piano. And so, uh, but yeah, my mother was a singer. I have actually pictures of her back in the day, and I asked, I said, Mom, I said, that's you? I said, wow, and my mom was like, wow, Mom, you are hot stuff. I was like, I was just, it's like, oh, you guys, she would do that. But it was such a trip just seeing my mother, and I wouldn't see her, like she would hum around the house, but she would never really sing, until one day she got together with her singing group as a reunion for one of their bandmates. And at the time, I wouldn't own a phone until like 2006. So all I had was like a camera. I didn't have video, audio, which I regret. But I still had pictures of it. And they got together and they were rehearsing, and I was like, they would just mumble the songs. I was like, why you guys mumbling the songs? Like, sing the songs. You gotta rehearse. Oh, we know what we're doing. Stop. I'm like, but Mom, like, you guys gotta rehearse. Like, you gotta sing. I'll just switch the key and we'll be fine. All right. I'm like, okay, well, okay, that key. I was like, okay, B flat it is. They got they got to the band. And I was like, okay, I told them, yeah, it's this key. This key is the one that works for them. Okay. So they did it. I heard them sing. I felt like a proud parent that day, for the first time. It was the reverse role. I'm sitting there with the camera, like, okay, taking pictures. And I was in tears because to watch my mother go back to her younger years, it made me want to see what it was like for her. Like, I got a glimpse of what it was like before I was born. What was her life like? And yeah, it was something. It was really something to watch my mother get there. And I mean, and she got back together with friends, but at first, when she was in the group, she was singing background. And she was always comfortable with that. But then they made her the lead singer. And she was nervous. She was like, I don't want to sing lead. I want to just sit in the background and do that. And I understandably so, but to hear her sing like she did, I was very blown away. It was like, wow, this is my mom. I didn't know she sung like this. And she could really sing, and I wish there was more of that. But I'm still asking her cousin. I need to go down to her cousin's basement and like find video of not only my mother singing, but some of the recordings that Hendrix did with her husband.
Oh, yeah, that would be
Yeah.
so. That's some gold in that basement, man.
Well, at least hopefully the tapes will work. We don't know until they, we figure it out. But if they do,
Sure.
that'll be a surprise.
That would be a really cool surprise.
Yeah.
Well, for the listeners who kind of want to hear your music, want to kind of get introduced to you musically, how would you recommend them find you? How do you recommend, what do they start with listening to you?
They can listen to. They can go find True Loves on Spotify, or they can go to our website, truelovesband.com, and we have the music listed there. Also, Parlor Greens, Parlor Greens.com. We're also on Spotify as well. So yeah, there's music out there on that. And there's stuff I've done like guest spots. I played on the song Slide by her. I was on that one. I did some stuff did one song where I'm playing bass on a J. Cole song. I think it was called Punching the Clock or something like that. I did some sessions with Kelly Finnegan, a song called Count Me Out on his Lover's Born album, and other people, as well. And so I'm just, yeah, doing that.
You're always playing.
Yeah.
Sounds like that's awesome. Well, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on, and thank you for sharing your stories and music with us. And
Oh, no worries.
definitely check him out. He's got the groove. He's got the groove. So, thank you, man.
Oh, no worries. Thank you for having me.